We've got some big guys on this panel and big talkers, so it is possible that there will be very limited time for Q&A, depending on how it goes, but please send your questions anyway. You're going to go sit on that side when you're done. Okay, so over to Alistair, and you're aware that you've got online.
Yes.
Good, thank you.
Thank you, Bernard. Okay, so just setting the scene for today, I'm just going to quickly go through some of the realities of making a project succeed in Africa, and from there those are some of the points that will then join into our panel discussion. Certainly in the world that we operate in at the moment, there's been a lot of flux. Let's say on a regional basis, all the uncertainty, and as I say, I'm dealing with the whole of Africa, nationalization, war, we look at North Kivu and those areas, so certainly a lot happening there. And these are items we speak about all the time. License to operate, community buy-in, and that rules of the game changing all the time. And certainly in the last while, combination between China, Russia, and America playing all over Africa. What does this mean? Is it good? Is it bad? One thing's for certain, it will have a big impact on many things. So certainly a combination of all of these is going to have a big input in how we ultimately put a model together to make a project succeed. Now, taking all of those realities into account, by now you've hopefully done a good study, used somebody who can put it together nicely and set you up correctly, raised some money, which is certainly the big issue, but for today, certainly not my problem. And then going into this beautiful continent where we operate, I'm going to explore a couple of the realities that we see time and time again when delivering projects around Africa. When projects start off, we know years of homework has been done. How are we going to get grid power? How are we going to get green energy and everything? But I must be honest, a reality we are seeing over and over in projects. Eskom is going to be late. If you're up north, probably even way bigger issues with getting grid power delivered on time. But actually, that goes one step further. It's all well and good having that power, but if you've only got grid power for 5 hours a day, that doesn't really help you. So often of late, it's almost becoming the standard in a project, 6 to 12 months before you commission, how are you going to get big diesel generators in? Certainly been a great business model for some service providers in the room today, but that is the reality of the world that we look in, and I think just take it into account when planning projects. If we look on the logistics side, I think we've all seen so much in the news of late what impact the Lobito corridor has had for ultimately unlocking value for the Kamoa project and that part of the DRC. But if we actually look around Africa, we've actually got a very, very different reality. And possibly with the exception of South Africa, Namibia, and Botswana, where there is much, much better infrastructure, albeit a long way from where we need it for bulk commodities. But if we go up into the rest of Africa, we've still got a long journey in this space. And the reality, in the DRC, if that's how you're going to deliver your equipment to site, 6-month turnaround for that truck that ultimately leaves South Africa to get all the way around. That certainly costs a lot of money. A lot of it will arrive with bumps and bruises, and sometimes it doesn't always arrive. So these are the realities. In the DRC, when you're mining 5% copper or tin, it's a cost of operating. But just imagine, in those places, if you had good infrastructure where you can get things in and out quickly, the real value that could be added to this continent. I mean, we've got good ore bodies around the world that we can unlock with good infrastructure, but other parts of Africa, we've got absolutely phenomenal ore bodies, but this is where most of the costs have to go, dealing with the realities of actually getting things in and out. Look, the security side, in many respects, that just becomes a go, no-go for any particular project. You sit up in West Africa at the moment, we've seen this so many times, and this is a place where a junior mining company, you can't solve all these problems on your own. This takes a certain team effort from all parties involved, and in many cases, you can only do so much with your own security, and that's the end of that project. And the last item I just want to set the scene with. To be able to make projects succeed, it takes an absolute ecosystem of people. And I'm sort of referring a lot here to South Africa. For projects to happen, you need suppliers, you need contractors, you need all your various expertise. We've still got that in South Africa. We have taken a big knock. If we lose that, we are absolutely buggered. Then the reality is you may just as well buy everything from somewhere else in the world. So for all of us with the SA base, we've got to do whatever we can to look after our supplier base. Okay, I don't know which of the pictures you want to leave us on there. So at this stage, moving on to the panel discussion, just introducing our panelists for today. Sitting in Australia, Doug Horak, CEO of Australia Africa Minerals Energy Group, AMEG. Errol Smart, who I think you all know very well from these various sessions over the years, independent consultant. Vusi Mabena.
Independent consultant sounds like recently unemployed to me. I'm also an independent consultant, so I should be able to comment.
Vusi Mabena, Executive Secretary, Mining Industry Association of Southern Africa, MISA. And Geert Klok, Chairman of the Board of the Chamber of Mines of Mozambique. Okay, gents, hopefully with setting the scene with a couple of the realities that we're dealing with there, I'm going to jump in and send the first question through to Vusi. We know how difficult logistics can be in Africa, and we have seen the successes from the Lobito corridor. Maybe if you can just give us some insights of this working regional collaboration on the infrastructure side.
Thanks very much, Alistair. I've got more problems than how it's properly working in Southern Africa. There's a glimmer of hope on one or two of them, which is Lobito, as you have rightfully mentioned. There are 3 or 4 corridors, regional corridors in the SADC region that we could optimally benefit from as mining as a whole, and junior mining specifically, and the economy in general. Let me start with the first one. They call it the North-South Corridor, DRC to Durban. Conceptualized in 2012, its objective was to connect the port of Durban to the DRC mineral belt via Zimbabwe and Zambia, and ease the congestion of the road freight that is itself struggling. Those of us who have tried to use it just to Zimbabwe, South Africa, could actually share their gory stories that you have to change the head of the train when it gets to the border, and then all the bureaucracy that has to do with customs and everything to move goods from one country to another, and the time it wastes. Just from DRC, from Zimbabwe to South Africa, your goods could be there for more than 30 days before it goes to the port. And because of all the bureaucracy that goes with it. It was conceptualized in 2012, as I've already said. And what was its vision? The vision was, as I've said, to ease the problems of logistics from the DRC right down to Durban. However, what are the challenges that are there with it? Regional cooperation, regular change of government administration. When a new administrator comes in terms of political administration, it doesn't have a vision of regional collaboration, and therefore this thing is not in their sight. And for them first to understand what it is about, it's time for them to change over. And that becomes a problem. And therefore, all the logistics then get stuck. And then poor infrastructure, deterioration of tax, operational inefficiencies, fragmented governance, bottlenecks. You know what's happening in South Africa in terms of our rail structure. Try to move a train from Limpopo to Durban, you're going to struggle. The other time, I tried to look at junior miners trying to move magnetite from South Africa to Maputo. It was a mission. The infrastructure is there, but the bureaucracy is mind-boggling. And simply because these countries do not have collaboration mechanisms amongst them to make seamless transportation of goods from one country to the other. Lobito Corridor was launched in 2023, 2024. It was a marvel of everybody. Everybody was excited. There's this good example of how logistics should be working across 3 or 4 countries. The consortium was supported by Angola, Zambia, the DRC, US government, the EU, and Trafigura-led consortium. That one seems to be working, but it is still not optimal because it is and everybody is looking at it because it is a shorter route than the the north-south corridor. And then there's another one called the Beira corridor that connects the port of Beira with Zambia via Mozambique, Zimbabwe, Malawi, and Michapanda rail line. What's interesting is that this one is working relatively well. It's taking shorter, but it's got its bureaucracies. And what's also very interesting that it was not affected by the recent political uprisings in Maputo. And it is smack bang right inside Maputo. Now, what has made that one to work is that there's what we call the Beira Institute, which is composed of the different stakeholders who come together to identify problems and solve them quickly. We should have had a Maputo Institute, which is connecting mostly chrome from South Africa, Zimbabwe, into Maputo port. But because that institute is non-functional, it was highly affected by the political uprisings. There was a complete standstill. But we're trying, I know that the Southern African business sector is trying to get the Maputo Institute to work properly so that at the end of the day, we cannot. But maybe one big problem about the Beira is that it is affected by the cyclonic, the cyclones that are very often in that area, and that really affects that route. The last one, which I'm not going to talk very much about, is the one that has got Kazungula Bridge on it. It seems to be working very well. It is unfortunate that one of the stakeholders, which is one of the member states, because they were trying to protect the north-south corridor, did not join. And you can see that bridge cutting across Zimbabwe and Zambia and not touching Zimbabwe. And it's affecting Zimbabwe very badly now because the border between Zimbabwe and South Africa is equally not working. You should just go there and see the number of trucks that are stuck there. Let me stop there.
Thank you, Vusi. We heard quite a lot there on Mozambique. Geert, we certainly know the uprisings and the various issues October last year linked with the elections and that. How has this impacted the mining industry and what can the junior mining companies do about it?
Indeed, Alistair. Let me start with saying that we're back to normal. Mozambique is calm. We still have great weather, so if you're bothered by the cold here, come and visit us. It's much more comfortable. Indeed, after the elections, presidential and parliamentary elections that we had in October of last year, we had protests, we had demonstrations starting protest against the alleged fraud at the elections. That expanded into all kinds of other issues that people had and were not happy with. The actions also gradually expanded into more violent actions, blockades, the border, as you may have known, the main border post with South Africa and Komati Port was blocked on several occasions. Also, the main highways were blocked at times. It was not just the Maputo corridor, but also other parts of the country were affected. So it spilled over. It had a regional effect. It impacted the logistics from South Africa to Maputo. But coming back to the question about the mining industry, also in Mozambique, it did impact our logistics. Most of the mines are in the center and north of the country. They have very long supply lines. A lot of the supplies, the equipment, consumables are coming from South Africa by road via the Maputo corridor and then up from Maputo to the north. That got disrupted, as well as some of the exports by rail from the central TED area. And we've also seen threats against mining companies. In fact, the opposition was demanding that they close down for a month, countrywide. So there was a lot of disruption in the economy as a result of the protest. And we've seen mine invasions, especially with the gemstone mines. We had mines that were invaded. So the lesson, I think, or a lesson that we can learn or draw from this, and maybe also looking at other countries can apply, is that in those situations where law and order break down, where it's chaos, maybe anarchy, your relations with the local communities, with the host communities, make all the difference. They can stand by you, they can defend you, or they can go against you. And therefore, the S in ESG is very important. It is not just something that you do when you start spending the big bucks and when you are investing in your mine and your processing plant, and you think, okay, we should also do something on our CSR and maybe build a school or a hospital. No, I think those relations with the host community should start from the very beginning. So we have got a lot of junior mining companies in the room. You know, you start with the field work, with the geologists that maybe just go in there in the dry season. But that's, in my opinion, already the moment that you need to engage, that you need to have the conversations with the host communities to see where they're at, what they want, what their needs are, what their expectations are. Also to manage those expectations with your local communities and be very transparent about what you're doing. We had a lot of misinformation and invented information about what mining companies are doing. We need to be transparent in our conversations so that there can be no misunderstandings. Thank you.
Thank you, Geert. Okay, we've dealt extensively with getting things in and out. But for a mining company to be able to come to life and to operate, it's fundamental that we've got this ecosystem that I dealt with earlier, suppliers, everybody. Errol, we spoke quite a lot the other day. Maybe just give us some insights as what should we be doing in that space to ensure this ecosystem?
Well, again, particularly speaking about this junior world that we have to speak about today, the juniors are beggars and users on the tail end of these bulk infrastructure projects. You know, we speak about mining investment costing hundreds of millions and taking 20 years to discover and build a mine. And somewhere along the line there, the junior miner generally gets taken over. In South Africa, we'll now have to have the minister's permission to be taken over. And then the big miner will come in and build a big mine. But these big infrastructure projects are multi-billion-dollar projects. They're generational life. They're not short-term life things. The juniors, and we've just heard now, that the juniors play the role of being the pathfinders. They find the minerals and they create that social interaction with people wherever they are. And it's very interesting here in Southern Africa at the moment.
I was wondering if nobody else could hear me, if it was just myself going deaf. So At the moment, you know, we in a big flux at the moment. You know, we just seen horrible cases of xenophobia again in South Africa. And these things ignite and they go across the subcontinent. And the logistics industry was one of those that was most impacted by xenophobia, because a truck driver can't change at every international border as you're crossing. You have to have consistency. But, and I just want to repeat something that I was saying earlier that obviously the back of the room didn't hear what I was saying, is infrastructure projects are multi-billion-dollar projects and they generational life. They also take longer than a mine to actually build. And if we don't start that process now of getting that infrastructure in place, the juniors don't know where they can go looking for minerals. So there's an interaction there, is the infrastructure developers need to know where the minerals are being discovered, but equally the junior miners need to know where they can actually invest to find minerals, because they'll be able to find a path to port. Junior miners are not going to be able to build a railway line. But anywhere else in the third world, it's the junior miners that actually start that process going. And there's an interaction that happens with the governments and the regulators where they speak into each other. And, you know, Bernard, you like to raise this whole thing about these partnerships. Well, this is one of those things where the partners have to listen to each other. And they actually have to act. It's no good just talking and repeating and nothing comes of it. Somebody has to actually listen. And the regulator can't be telling you where you should be looking for what mineral. The minerals are where they are in the ground. And we need that certainty of where we can look for them and where we can get them to port. So for the juniors and for the mining industry, we play that key role, because you cannot start building logistics unless you know that there's a user of those logistics from the pit to port at the end of the day.
Oh, I don't need that. Thank you. Thanks, Errol. So this ecosystem, I mean, we're dealing with a lot of the issues that we've got here, but certainly on the side of this, a number of Aussie service providers, much to my dismay, have actually done incredibly well in Africa, particularly in West Africa. Doug, can you just give us some insights as to what is done differently to ensure that they are successful?
Thanks, Alistair. Thanks, Bernard, Wilma, and the rest of the team for having me. It's really good to be part of this. Can you hear me okay, Alistair?
Yes.
Fantastic. When I arrived in Australia some years ago, so probably 18 years ago now, there were between 250 and 260 odd junior miners across the African continent at various stages. And that number alone blew me away. I did not expect to discover that. And I think it was almost double that in terms of number of service providers across the continent, right? And I was very surprised by it. But the result, and going back to what you're asking, is that you then have a situation where you have this incredible base of opportunity across the continent for Australian companies not only to operate, but service providers to operate, right? So I remember asking Peter DeLeo, who's the current head of Lycopodium, why did he go to Africa? And his answer was quite simply, Doug, because our clients were going to Africa and they wanted us there. And similarly, when you look at the groups like the Barminkas of the world, you know, part of the Parenti group, a lot of the reason they operate in those regions is because of the long, deep relationships they've had with those mining companies. And some of them go back 20, 30 years, right? So I think it's been a combination of two things. One is the fact that there have been that many juniors over time across the continent. I think currently we probably have about 170 odd and roughly 120 that are active. And that's across around 32 to 34 countries. So it's a very broad-based opportunity from a service company perspective, and very viable, right? We see Parenti's a $1 billion company. Lyco is probably $500 million company. Arminco is not far away from that. And Burncut, sorry. So yeah, it's frustrating as an expat to see that we're not necessarily getting our rightful Southern Africa and Africa share of the work. But I understand why it's grown like that. They trust each other. They've worked together for decades. So, yeah.
Thank you, Doug. I'm going to move slightly. Vusi, the next one for you. You're involved sort of on a regional basis. Are there things that we could do to actually harmonize how the rules of the game work across countries for mining industry to thrive better?
No, there are quite a number of things that we could do, but we need to, as the cliche is, we need to get the fundamentals right. Let's put it that way, of how logistics works. Let me start that way. One of the big challenges we have is that a truck moving or a train moving from one country to another en route to a port has got a number of challenges that it has to do in terms of customs unions, changing the head of the train and things like that, and all that wastes a lot of time. Now, let's move on just to talk a little bit about policies that make it difficult for juniors to succeed and be successful. We heard earlier on about a definition. Somebody said a Google definition of a junior. A definition is a startup mine, a guy who is really starting up and trying to get along in the mining industry. And then he comes to invest and try to get mining going in a country, and then gets trapped into the legislation and the laws of that country. One of the legislation that actually discourage investment would be free carry. The government comes in and it says to you, we will take whatever percentage of your company shares for free. The very little money that they need to actually get that. And maybe it's not a bad idea, because in most governments, the government is the holder of the rights on behalf of the country. But the challenge is that the discrepancy is so big from one country to the other that it sets up one country against another country. We need some kind of alignment. One country asks for 10%, one country asks for 0%, the other country asks for 15%. What is the investor going to do? He's going to take the easy way out and discourage other countries. Thank you.
Good. Thanks, Vusi. Errol, in our preparation chats, you spoke extensively about the importance of certainty around the regulatory landscape. Do you want to give us the abridged version of that? We've got 4 minutes left for the rest of us to wrap.
Yeah, I think that discussion happened before the release of the amendment bill.
It's now clear. Which part don't you get?
Yeah, so we're going to be sitting here for another 10 years. What did you say, Bernard? 11 years, eh? I think we've been sitting here for 11 years speaking about the same thing. And I think every year we've said exactly the same thing. So I don't know who's deaf in the room, because when they get around to drafting, we don't actually get what's spoken about. So those lawyers, Lily, you need to draft something and hand it across that people understand that actually works. Because we do have to have the certainty. South Africa used to be the leader in the region, in the SADC region. We were the mining mega house of Africa. We were the heart of it, and it's busy failing. We've got to ask ourselves why it's failing. It's failing because there's uncertainty. We need these investor friendlies. Where's Mabuza? Where's my little brother? He's disappeared before I have a chance to have a go at him. It makes my heart very sore. Because you can make stuff work if you have to, but you can make it work a hell of a lot faster and better, and you can get a lot more working if you have investor-friendly regulations and certainty. And you can't have it changing every time. You can't shake hands at Mining Indaba on certain key things that are going to be in a bill. And then when we come to Junior Indaba, just 4 months later, it's all changed. We need certainty. Then we can make mines happen. If mines happen, they can fund international logistics and infrastructure.
So can I paraphrase? You should not be wasting your time at the mining Indaba because nothing good comes out of it. Is that what you just said?
Yeah,
Okay,
but then we
move on,
come
move
here
on.
and we say the same thing and also nothing happens. So nothing happens.
Okay.
Okay, Doug, on your side, we've seen so many, particularly West Africa, Aussie gold miners succeed. Just give us some thoughts around successes and probably more so focus on the frustrations. The 1 minute abridged version, please.
Okay, sure. I think it touches on a couple of things, and I think we were talking a little bit earlier about Mozambique, right? So one of the challenges around how the continent is viewed is unfortunately not nuanced enough, right? So when something happens in Mozambique, Southern Africa and the Southern African region takes a beating from an investment perspective. And one of the success stories in West Africa, from an Australian perspective, well, there are a number, but one of is West African Resources, which has a couple of projects now. They're about to sort of get the second one going, which is in Burkina Faso. And a few months ago, when Mali suddenly had issues, West African Resources lost 25% on the stock exchange within a day, right? So it's seen as West Africa, which is challenging. So we have a number of frustrations when it comes to the sort of educating of the broader invest environment, because the minute anything like that happens and is visible across the very many platforms that are out there, you have the people ringing up their brokers saying, have we got money in West Africa, pull it out, right? Or move it. And similarly in the Southern African region, where you have issues, they might not be in South Africa, they might not be in Namibia, they might not be in Botswana, but it impacts that region, right? And going back to what Errol was saying, one of the biggest challenges is that level of uncertainty, and it touches a little bit on some of the free carry conversations. You know, you try and retrofit or retrospectively increase free carry is very difficult when you've got a mine that's been up and running for 10 years. It changes the entire model. And it may or may not be viable post that conversation. Right? So, yeah.
Good. Thanks, Doug. To finally wrap us up, Geert, are there any other risks that junior miners need to be considering? Something for future discussions.
Infrastructure was mentioned, and cyclones not just in Mozambique, but in general. I think extreme weather events, whether that's cyclones, whether it's floods, droughts, and really designing your logistics about that. You know, do you need to use hydro, and what is the risk? Do you need to bring your electricity from far, and what is the risk? Are you bringing in the diesel? Where is it going to come from? Can you do things more locally? And then the rest, we have to discuss at some other time, or when you'll come to vacation in Mozambique, come and look us up and we'll chat further.
The Minister of Tourism of Mozambique. Alistair, perhaps I can put this first question to perhaps you and Errol on that side. So 11 years ago, 10 years ago, 9 years ago, we had this conversation. And when we had companies on show, I would say very few were from Botswana and Namibia. I didn't count, but Botswana and Namibia succeeded. So all of these stories are true, and yet, right next to us are two very successful jurisdictions. From your perspective, why? And then Errol, you comment.
The rules of the game are clear. There doesn't seem to be any of the other nonsense. Who do you deal with? It's climb in, do the work. People understand the regulatory framework, so you know to talk to, get sorted out, and then the clients can get on, do the study work. When we do work there, it's all about the technical solution, not dealing with 100 other political things in the background. We actually get to the real thing to sort it out.
Errol, and perhaps also comment, infrastructure, is it, will my Prado survive in Botswana and Namibia?
They will survive because they first created an environment for exploration. Exploration discovered the minerals, they proved the minerals, And now there's money to build infrastructure. So they're building railway lines, they're building ports, and they're using international competitive tension. You know, you've got the BRICS playing a game off against the Middle East, playing a game off against white monopoly capital from the Western world. We should be playing all of those off against each other to get people to build railway lines, to build our ports, because we don't have the finances available internally in the region. We have to attract international funding, and we need competitive tension. And that's what Botswana and Namibia are doing very well. If you go there, that's a hive of activity. They've got Germans arguing with Chinese, arguing with Indians about building rail, road, ports, and infrastructure. We should be there. We're not.
Vusi, a question, are these new corridors not a good stimulator? In other words, a kick up the arse for countries who are being bypassed? So, I mean, do you think these new corridors will wake up South Africa, Zimbabwe?
They should have woken up long ago. That's the only thing I can say about them. It should, especially when I think of the Kalahari corridor, which included, as I said, the Kozungula, where Zimbabwe was interested in safeguarding South-North. And now they're actually suffering because the bridge is, you can actually see the bridge going bypast the thing. So it should wake us up, because they are actually looking and saying, licking their wounds and saying, whew, we're missing such a big opportunity there. You know, when you look at that corridor, it's actually one-stop station in Zimbabwe on the Zambian side and on the Botswana side. And what a pleasure. And that should wake all of us up, including South Africa and Maputo.
But isn't the Minerals Council so successfully taking all the attention to the current big players and fixing those corridors that we aren't thinking beyond that? Aren't we just fixing the two lines that exist? Correctly so, but I mean, aren't we? A junior doesn't get really, or will a junior benefit from the current initiatives?
The junior should benefit greatly on it, because when you look at the investment and the capital they put into their projects, there isn't much going into logistics. And if then the various member states work together to create that environment by making sure that the logistics work and that the bureaucracy is limited, it makes it easier for the junior to transport goods from one country through the other country to the port.
Errol, help me here, because somebody paid to be here in person or online, I don't know, because he or she is so brave that they are doing this anonymous. I want to give them value for the money. He or she says, the conversation narrative remains the same for juniors, it seems. Nothing new coming from this. So, nothing new. So you hear the frustration. This poor dude paid to be here, and he says, you guys are wasting my time. Nothing new comes from that.
I take the fifth.
That's your fault.
I share the frustration, and you guys can see it's leaking out of me, the frustration, because we've had these conversations repeatedly. And we all think we understand each other, and we all shake hands and agree on what's going to happen. And next year we'll be back here having the conversation again around whether it's a mining charter or a change in a mining act or something. And the countries that are keeping consistency are winning. You raised it. Namibia and Botswana are good examples. They didn't reinvent the wheel. They used the existing wheel and they made it work. And unfortunately, the leader, the historical leader, is losing in the competitive game.
So perhaps a final question, Doug and Alistair. Doug, perhaps if I go to you first. So right now, the world's all hyped up about different categories of minerals, critical minerals. We talk about mining now, we talk about exploration, even further up. Are you guys, Doug, are you seeing any money being spent midstream, upstream? Because the world doesn't need manganese, it needs high purity manganese sulfate. There are a few steps between. Are you seeing any of that from where you sit? Will that ever come to Africa, or is that going to continue to be in China and perhaps Korea?
Bernard, thank you. I think a couple of observations. What we have started seeing, there's been a lot of talk, as you well know, around critical or strategic minerals, and from the Europe, in Australia, and Europeans, UK. This year, we've actually seen some checks starting to be written around that, and some new funds being developed and actually making investments. And I think that is positive. In terms of, are we going to see refineries and that sort of beneficiation happen in countries? I was at Mining Indaba present at a Japanese Namibia discussion, and that looked extremely positive. And I think in that long term, there's definitely a lot more opportunity there. I think, unfortunately, there's a very strong chance that Africa is going to remain a commodities exporter, and not only in terms of China, but I think it's going to move into the Middle East as well. You know, earlier we spoke a little bit about some of the funding or some of the players, the Chinese, the Russians. We've seen Turkey taking a much more strategic approach to Africa, but the Saudis, the Qataris are all, Emiratis are all really looking at how they leverage, because they know they've got to exit fossil fuels, right? So they're looking at what is next for them. They've got very deep pockets. They have got very cheap energy. They don't necessarily have currently the technical expertise, but they can buy that, right? So yeah, I think we're starting to see a shift. I would be extremely hopeful that some of it will remain on the continent. I think jurisdictions, going back to what Errol was saying, the likelihood is we will see stuff happening in Namibia or Botswana more likely. I think there are other regions which have the potential, but not in the short or medium term.
Errol, sorry, not Errol, the other guy. What's his name?
Alistair.
Alistair. We're out of time, so we're standing between our people and tea and coffee. By the way, there are 2 tea tables inside. I don't know who's responsible for that. The coffee point, and there's a coffee point outside, just to clarify. There's enough coffee. Just go outside, okay? There's an ENS coffee station there. Quickly, are you as DRA capable, able to help Africa to go midstream and upstream?
We've certainly
Yes
got
or
the
no?
skills, yes.
Yes. So the skills is not completely lost.
In the continent to operate, that's where I do fear the ability to design and build. We've still got on the continent for sure.
So a topic like challenges, risks, frustrations is a challenging, risky, frustrating conversation. Of course, there are lots of issues. Why I so love the 2 days is you're going to hear people who, despite this, are currently succeeding. So perhaps, if you are too doom and gloomy, perhaps some of it is you, eh? Go out there and do something. Let's do tea and coffee. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.